quite a few new faces on the call this morning. So my name's Jonathan Downs. I lead the policy and performance teams at Oldham Council. Oldham is also accountable body for the Co-op Council's Innovation Network, so I also have the pleasure of chairing the Officer Network. We're going to have a really interesting session today. We've got quite a few new members who are going to do a bit of an introduction to themselves and their local authority, as well as telling us a little bit about hopefully what they hope to get out of being members of the Co-op Council's Innovation Network. But before we get into that, we've got Simon from, I think it's from Oxford, who's going to do a bit of a rundown of the Mondragon trip and let us know about what was covered while in Spain. So I will hand straight over to you if that's okay, Simon.
Absolutely. Just share my screen. How's that for everyone? Is that?
That's good.
That's good. Just one second. Get it in. Presenter view. There we go. Brilliant. Well, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Simon Grovite. I work for Oxford City Council as a Principal Economic Development Officer, particularly sort of with a bit of a focus on community wealth building and the sort of developing agenda there. And I was lucky enough to attend the recent trip to Mondragon. So I'm going to give a bit of an overview on some of the sort of key points that we found. I'll give a brief overview of the trip and what we found. But I thought, just kind of from my vantage point, I suppose one of the things that's been challenging in promoting this agenda sort of locally has been this sort of perception, I suppose, that that cooperatives are very much sort of seen as a bit of a marginal economic model. They're not really part of our sort of mainstream discourse around economic development, and that sort of constrains some of our ability to talk about cooperatives in the settings that are making sort of key decisions on these things. So you know, some of the perceptions, I suppose, they seem to be small, inefficient, unable to innovate, slow to exploit opportunity, that sort of thing. It was put quite nicely by our guide in Mondragon that he suggested maybe you think cooperatives are about some freaky people doing some nice things together. This is very much not the view that we got in Mondragon. So it really sort of counters these perceptions. What we saw was a real sort of, I suppose, capitalist discipline, but with a very much socialist distribution of benefits and outcomes. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So just to summarize, there were 12 of us went on the trip, plus Nicola, and that was a delegation largely of sort of council officers, but also councillors and one or two journalists and comms people. And we took in a number of sites. So this first scene is us at the Management Development Centre. So this is one of a number of cooperatives in the group. We then took in an industrial cooperative, a research and development centre, and the university, which is also cooperative. So just to give you a bit of an idea of the scale of the Mondragon Corporation, it employs 80,000 people, 35 of whom are member owners, 35,000 of whom. It has an annual revenue of around 11 billion euros, includes 95 cooperatives within the group, plus 132 companies abroad. There are 23 other structures within that. To focus in on the cooperatives, there's a huge range of activity within that group. It's primarily sort of industrial manufacturing, high-end manufacturing, producing sort of car parts, automotive technology, huge range of things, but also educational co-ops, research and development co-ops, services, and even one of the largest supermarket chains in Spain. So huge range of things. So what does it sort of mean at the fundamentals? So it's based on a principle of one member, one vote. So it's owned by the workers. Members can vote in elections to nominate people to the presidential council. It has a very narrow remuneration system, so the wage ratio within a co-op never exceeds a ratio of 1 to 7. So the lowest paid worker is never paid more than less than 7 times what the highest paid worker is. And members buy a share in the company, so they have a capital stake in the company, and that they share in the fortunes of that company and have voting rights on key decisions. So that membership is a really fundamental piece of how Mondragon has been able to achieve its scale. So it's kind of dating back to when this was just a collection of small cooperatives. The challenge that cooperatives often have is around raising capital, and by buying into the ownership of the company, they were able to generate enough capital to invest in plant machinery and so on, and sort of develop into a competitive organization. That 16,000 euros that each member puts in generates profit. So it profits from the group are allocated to into the central pot, which is then allocated out to other to worker owners, meaning that they have a sort of a direct stake in the growth of the organization. There are other functions that capital plays as well. So any profits from the group, first the profits are divided across different cooperatives within the division, so that allows some support within the group to less profitable firms, but also those funds are then invested into local projects as well. So there's a huge amount of good that money does, but it also means that when a member then leaves the company or comes to the end of their working life, they have a fairly substantial pot of capital, effectively a pension fund, that they can then cash out. So it's not possible to cash out your capital pot until the end, until you leave the company. So just to touch on the structure of the individual cooperatives within the group. So this is a sort of a representative rather than direct democratic decision-making model. So that in some ways avoids the high transaction costs that you might commonly find in cooperatives, where decision-making could slow the process of the enterprise. So what happens is a general assembly is elected once a year. That general assembly appoints the governing council. The governing council appoints the management team, and the managers have a fairly high level of control over the activities of the group. But there are various checks and balances within that to allow the workers and those sort of on the factory floor to be able to make the management accountable. So the social council is a body that's comprised of workers, and that they have a direct relationship with the governing council and the management team, and are able to hold them to account. So it effectively works as a sort of internal union, but also obviously members then have the right to remove the general managers or through the General Assembly on that annual basis. So this is a sort of just an image of the structure of the group as a whole. So that sort of that model is sort of replicated at that next level. So within individual co-ops, they sit within different divisions. There's an industrial division, a finance division, a distribution division, and a knowledge division, and each one has a level of autonomy to make decisions within it, but it's ultimately accountable to Congress and the Standing Committee, which is again elected. So so members have a direct stake in the fortunes of business, and one of the benefits of that has been that it's allowed members to or it's allowed actually facilitated difficult decision making. So where cooperatives where there have been financial crises, the Mondragon Group has actually fared remarkably well and managed to avoid laying off workers because of, I guess, partly because members are directly involved in decision making. They have a direct stake in the ongoing fortunes of the business, and so decision making has become it's become easier to make difficult decisions, and that might mean reallocating workers within the overall body, but it might also mean yeah, that sort of thing. But it's not without tension. So there are pressures on those wage ratios, continual sort of debate about the extent to which this is constraining their ability to attract talent within the group, but also you know, there's questions around offshore production and challenges about kind of the extent to which that's diluting the identity and the principles of the group. And one of the things that I think we took as a very important take-home message was, you know, that this makes no claims to be a utopia. It's a system for creating good jobs and stable jobs, and it's fared remarkably well through recent sort of financial crises. So I think in some respects it avoids some of those commonly perceived problems with co-ops. The idea that co-ops are inefficient. Actually, this has shown that there is a highly effective management and continuous improvement culture sort of embedded within the system, and they've managed to remain globally competitive. That employee engagement and the direct stake that employees have reduces some of the need for management controls, and allows difficult decisions to be taken because members are directly involved and engaged in how those decisions are taken. I think the point about scale is an interesting one, that Mondragon intentionally constrains the size of its cooperatives, but within in order to retain that sort of direct stake and allow workers to have a very direct stake in the fortunes of the business, but it does clearly benefit from the scale of the overarching structure and the expertise within the wider group that can then be drawn in and built on. So the idea that co-ops can't innovate, I think there's clear evidence from Mondragon that that's simply not the case. They are pushing forward in a number of areas, a number of really cutting edge advanced technologies, and really sort of pushing forward, and that's something that there is a flexibility built into the identity of the corporation. It's not a fixed kind of dogmatic structure in any way. They're very much looking to evolve it and looking to respond to new opportunities. And then on the challenge of attracting talent, I mean, they would say that this is very much a current challenge that they're having, and they're now a global company and competing with companies that are paying vastly higher wages for particular sort of skills. They're addressing that in a number of ways. So the fact that they have a university as part of the group, and the governing council has sort of direct influence on what those courses are and how to develop those curricula, means that means that the curricula can respond to the needs of the organizations within that group. But they're also, in some cases, employing contractors on short-term contracts at higher wages than the management structure would allow. So there's a sort of a pragmatic acceptance that they do need in some cases to sort of move outside of that cooperative structure to remain competitive. I think a really important point about sort of, you know, bringing this back to why would we look to do this? You know, what's the value of cooperatives in a wider economy? It's quite neatly summarized here, but the objective of the cooperative is not to produce rich people, it's to produce rich societies. We don't have a lot of rich people, or not very rich, but on the other hand, we also don't have poor people. So that was really evident. So being in Mondragon, you got the sense of a very much a large middle, very few sort of extremes of wealth, but and a place that sort of functioned very effectively for that. So just touching on some of those points around economic security, it has the lowest unemployment in Spain as a region. Obviously, the wages mean that you don't have those disparities of wealth that's sort of baked into the structure of the organization. You also have people benefiting from capital ownership, so that, you know, people have a direct stake in one of the largest companies in Spain. Therefore, they have that capital to fall back on as equivalent to a sort of a pension, and also the group provides healthcare and other sort of social services as part of that. The redeployment and retraining, so in times of crisis, where individual co-ops within the group are struggling, there's significant scope to redeploy people. They make very few redundancies. That's very much a last resort, and there are a lot of stats out there that demonstrate that it's been much more effective than other industries in being able to keep redundancy as an absolute last resort. One of the ways they've done that actually is to generate an agreement to reduce wages in times of crisis. So where the fortunes of a co-op are challenged, they're able to reduce wages or redeploy workers, or even cross-subsidize those co-ops from more profitable co-ops. So it does sort of build in that security, and that's obviously has significant social impacts for the place. It's interestingly, we struggled to find any sort of academic studies, either from Mondragon or from elsewhere, that had really gone into the wider well-being impact on this. But if you sort of think back to the likes of the Spirit level, and, you know, the studies that have shown that more equal societies tend to be healthier and happier, it's worth noting that Mondragon is comparable to Norway and Finland in terms of its sort of inequality coefficient. So it's one of the most equal places on Earth, and the difference between the likes of Norway and Finland is that that's done without having to tax at a high rate. So the distribution is built into the system rather than being something that's sort of done after the event, which clearly sort of shows in the town just feeling like very much there's an equality that's built into that. And I suppose the other point that, again, it's sort of hard to articulate in numbers, but that greater agency that people have in their jobs, in their economic life, is something that clearly does have some social benefits, slightly unproven in terms of sort of empirical studies, but very much as you know, there is direct participation in decision making. People have an ownership in the company's success, and also the sort of the structures that are built in mean that there's more scope, I suppose, within the organisation for the development of sort of management and negotiation skills through the likes of the social council and the General Assembly. So I suppose some of the take-home messages for me really is that it is possible for an organisation to be globally competitive and innovative whilst being more equal and equitable, and that I think sort of in the Oxford context quite important, because you know, we are seeing growing inequality, we're seeing a lot of economic success stories, but we don't want to create another Silicon Valley. We don't want a sort of a creative overclass and a sort of service class at the bottom, and so this sort of provides some kind of shining light for how we might look to build some of these things into the system more directly. I think some of the prerequisites to how this could take root. I mean, one thing that's clearly evident in Mondragon is that there is a baked-in culture of cooperativism, and that's something that developed over a number of years. It's something that hasn't just, you know, it would be difficult to transpose that, but that on that point, I suppose the education and training is a really fundamental of fundamental importance to that, and you know, then we like to consider ways that could be embedded a little bit more locally. The flexibility is really important. I mean, they and that's partly structural, that they've been able to sort of build in representative decision making, but remained you know, retained aspects of a sort of command and control managerial structure that I think has allowed them to take difficult decisions when they've needed to. And financial independence. I mean, so one of the cooperatives within the group is actually the region's second largest financial institution now, and that's been hugely helpful. I mean, so that grew out of the initial early sort of formation of the group, but it was partly, you know, in response to where do you put the membership fees, you know, so it was the sort of collecting the shared membership fees, and then where does that money go and what return is there on that money. That led to the formation of Lagoon Arrow, which of Caja Laboral, which is their the cooperative bank that sits within the group. That's clearly one of the challenges that we have in the UK is financing these sorts of things, and obviously without being able to raise shareholder capital, that becomes a real challenge for co-ops. So we do need to think long and hard about how that might be possible, and then national and local policy support. So I just touched on the founding father of Mondragon, and this is very much he was central to the formation of the co-ops, but he was a radical priest, moved to Mondragon in 1941, and was assigned to supporting young people within the steel industry, which was one of the few sort of economic entities in the area. It was very, very poor area, very remote, and somewhat sort of detached from the rest of the Spanish economy. He developed a technical college to train up workers, and then set up the first co-op in 1959, which was manufacturing steel stoves, and was very much the sort of central intellectual figure behind the movement. The quote here, I mean, it's very much centering on the fact that there needs to be a sort of a cultivation of the soil. You know, we need to these principles don't come naturally to people. They didn't come naturally to people in the Basque region. This, you know, was very much a movement that started in a place and developed from there. So so I think it's worth a bit of reflection on what we might do locally to cultivate those soils. And I think this is a sort of I suppose a starting point for a discussion really about where we might go from here, and what might lead into sort of greater support for cooperatives. So there's a need to embed that cooperative culture. There's a need for finance and investment. There's a need for policy support, and there's a need to and there's a potential, I think, really to engage and incentivize in emerging growth sectors. You know, it needs to start somewhere, but potentially looking at areas where there are already where there's new opportunity, and you know, is there scope for the likes of local authorities and committed local organizations to sort of lean their weight in behind some of these things and try to seed some of these things as we go. So so I'm going to stop there and just sort of invite some discussion really, and others who were on the visit, feel free to sort of chip in any other reflections really. But I think my main take home is that very much there is that something hugely positive happening in Mondragon. It started from a very low base. Everything has to start somewhere. So so what are some of the things that we could be doing as a group to push that forward?
Oh, thank you, Simon. I've said in the chat that was a fantastic presentation. Really inspiring to hear about the work happening in Mondragon. I think I'd been reflecting before the call today about almost what the takeaways could be from sort of the Mondragon model, and I was almost, because of the maturity and the scope, I was almost struggling to think about how it was applicable to almost to somewhere like Oldham or any other local authority across the country. But I think some of the points you made there are really, really relevant. And I was just thinking about things like the levelling up agenda, depending on what happens with the next sort of autumn budget statement, and whether levelling up is still a thing following that. But it feels like there could be potentially some really clear links to the levelling up agenda. And I wonder if there's maybe opportunities to think about how we almost build more cooperative ways of working while also trying to level up, so almost that more equitable leveling up, rather than just leveling up for the sake of leveling up.
Yeah, no, would absolutely agree. And I think some of this, if we have local authorities that are committed to this agenda, we do have influence, we do have position within groups, within local conversations to be pushing this. I mean, some of the sort of conditions I think that we could be setting, I'm thinking particularly around procurement and asset management and so on. But if we're making sort of explicit reference to the social values that are embodied in these structures, and tilting our assessment of commercial opportunities to include those social values, I think there is scope. There's always a chicken and egg with this stuff, isn't there? That I'm sort of in the position of trying to push this as something that should be embedded in our procurement conversations. But if the co-ops don't exist, people can't quite see why you would bother doing that. But in fact, it's about setting the conditions. It's about sort of setting the fertile soil to say, this is a place that, as co-ops develop, there will be future opportunities to take on spaces, to take on local public contracts, that sort of thing. So we almost have to create the conditions in order that when somebody comes along with the idea, that seems like a viable and a viable opportunity. That could include sort of, you know, making a commitment to reserving public contracts. So you know, actually stating that, you know, we will seek to reserve X number of contracts a year for cooperative organisations. They might not exist yet, but in setting that as a sort of a clear, you know, 5-year pathway, that becomes something that the market can respond to. And I think, I mean, the finance challenge is clearly a big one, and I don't know exactly where you go with that. You know, I think obviously public loans would be lovely, but which councils have huge reserves that they can play with at the moment. So it is a challenge, and perhaps levelling up provides one mechanism for that, and perhaps you know, change of government, we might see further opportunities. But yeah. Katrina, I can see you've got your hand up there.
Yeah, no, just like a quick question, how they had kind of built the, also thank you for a really interesting and good presentation. Just like in terms of kind of, obviously place-based aspects are both like an opportunity and a restraint in many ways, and kind of how, when they started this whole project, what kind of infrastructure and kind of institutions were already in place that they could keep building on, or is most of the stuff that they kind of created through, like, as a cooperative, was it already there, or has it all been kind of created as new organizations and opportunities, basically, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, that does make sense, and it's a really fundamental piece of the Mondragon story, really, was that at the time that the first cooperatives were developed, there really wasn't very much. It was a very underdeveloped region. It was a very sort of remote region in Spain. This was post Franco. It was, you know, post Civil War. So it was during the Franco dictatorship, and this was sort of very much an isolated region with very few economic opportunities. And so the first mobilizing impulse, I suppose, was really to secure good jobs and develop internal technical acumen. So it started with Ariz Mendieta, the priest, establishing a technical college in order to train up a cohort of semi-skilled people from the steel factory, so that they could sort of develop new enterprise initiatives. So it didn't have cooperatives in mind at first, but actually that sort of developed as a model just because there was a sort of, you know, they were looking for a way to ensure a sort of, you know, good opportunities and fair opportunities. So it started very small, as other people within Mondragon continued to sort of develop ideas, to continue to develop businesses and spin-offs. And this was partly sort of driven by a small cohort of people, which included Ariz Mendieta. It then began to sort of develop a scale, which meant that sort of shared pot of finance was able to be deployed towards new initiatives. And so it very much started small, but kind of took off from there. And then things like the university, things like the research centre are actually responses by the group to, you know, new external challenges, I suppose. So you know, they started to find that they didn't necessarily have sufficient managerial competency within the group, so they set up a management development centre. They you know, the similar thing with the R&D capabilities. So it's very much evolved out of a very humble origin, and I suppose part of the thing that they did have was they were almost sort of left to it. You know, it was such a remote region, they were able to just sort of get on with it, which is, you know, it's a challenge, but it's also through a different lens a disadvantage. You know, if it shouldn't mean that we can't attempt something locally, but it, you know, it doesn't have to look like this. But I think this sort of provides a shining light for what can be done, and a sort of pragmatic way to ensure a greater sort of equality. But Nicola, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the slide you've got on the screen here is absolutely perfect. One of the things that they set out to do was to change the region and not to change the world. You know, everything was about local people. So, you know, the fact that we've got the mutual banking on here, when they wanted money and the banks refused, the priest just went back and said, okay, we'll set up a credit union. You know, it was very much, you know, if we can't get it done from elsewhere, then we'll do it ourselves. You know, I love the fact that children, they built schools because they wanted their children to go to school locally. They could live in, there was a lot of flats, you know, they made maximum use of the places where they lived. Quite funnily enough, they also had houses, most people had houses near the sea as well. So they'd live in the town, they'd live near their neighbours. They would also, you know, they'd have family close by. The kids went to school locally, they worked on their doorstep, and then they could go away at the weekends and holidays. You know, it was very much about the whole person, from cradle to grave, looking after each other, very much you know, investing in their future. If you didn't put a foot wrong, you had your whole life laid out for you right from the moment that you walked through the door. So, you know, it really was, it was something very, very different to anything that we've seen here. And that's part of the Mondragon phenomenon challenge, isn't it? How do you replicate something that has grown to be you know, a global player? And interestingly, you can only be, the membership is only in the Basque Country. So I know that Sue Woodward from Burntwood was saying that her, you know, they've got a Mondragon facility in Burntwood, but we learned that they're not actually members. You know, that's very much shareholder driven, you know, profit. Yeah, brilliant presentation, thank you.
Clayton, you've got your hand up. Over.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, it sort of leads on really nicely from what Nicola was saying. So firstly, just to say that was an incredible presentation, and I've gone from being very envious about not having gone to now being very inspired. So I'm grateful for that on a personal level. But also, two real things kind of hit me in that presentation that I'm really really struck by. And one is that fantastic quote about creating rich societies and not rich people. Which really builds on what Nicola was saying about how that kind of wealth creation is really focused on a collective level and not just on individuals, or, you know, thinking very much about how that wealth can be distributed. And the second point is what you mentioned about the distribution and the kind of inequality levels, and talking about Norway. But of course, the crucial difference being that these mechanisms of redistribution are built into the economy in that hardwired and embodied way. And that really strikes me in terms of the potential both for effectively growing community wealth, but also kind of making sure that it's kind of very ethical and shared in the way that it should be immediately. Particularly thinking about the Oxford example, thinking about the tremendous growth that we have in the region, but it's always a case of, well, we have to grow first before we can think about sharing that pie out, you know, and that's dangerous, because obviously then if the growth isn't high enough, there's excuses to say, oh, well, we don't redistribute then because there's not enough growth. You know, so kind of making sure that kind of redistribution is at the point it's produced in the way that this cooperative does is absolutely inspiring to me. So lots of sort of relevant takeaways there, but I just wanted to pick out those couple. And I guess the other kind of quick thing as well to say is that it was interesting to see about the challenges around recruitment of talent, because, you know, who wouldn't want to go and work there, to be honest? It was my first thought. But also maybe this kind of buying into the model and having to pay that fee is a barrier for some people. That would be interesting to interrogate. But also on the obverse of that, it makes me realize that, I mean, what an incredible potential for talent retention and growth. So picking up on the points that Nicola was saying about having the in-house university and really developing and reallocating people as needed, there must be a huge scope for just really kind of generating and building on people's buy-in, but then also building and developing the capital that people bring as well in terms of their skills and expertise that just must make the whole system far more sustainable and viable as well. So yeah, sorry to talk at length, but I was very encouraged by the talk and really enjoyed it, so thank you.
No, cheers, Clayton. Yeah, I mean, just to sort of pick up on a couple of bits of that, the the points about sort of buying in and the sort of impact on work, where workers, retention of workers, I suppose. I mean, it's not unusual for that 16,000 euros to grow to 250,000 euros over the course of somebody's career. So that, it's a significant sort of retention factor that sort of built into it. And also, education and sort of reallocating people. That I mean, we heard, it was interesting. We heard from somebody who'd grown up in the region, had moved away, had a career in sort of I think public relations, and had then moved back, partly because of the lifestyle, because of the sort of quality of life. She wanted to raise a family. There was sort of pull factors. She actually became president of her cooperative. Important point actually about the cooperative: if you are voted by your peers to become president, it's compulsory. There's no sort of there's no avoiding it. And that was a bit of a challenge for her at times, I think, but absolutely a way to sort of develop a lot of skills, a lot of sort of capacities, and the group's very supportive of that as you go through. So yeah, it was just very impressive on a number of levels. Nicola.
I was just going to add, it was also something really difficult for our politicians to understand, because there's no canvassing. You don't go out and say, I would like to be president of this organisation. You're absolutely chosen by your colleagues. It is a very different way of going, and they do their own job at the same time. So they could be working on a factory floor somewhere, and it was taken that was the norm. There was nothing extra, but you were now the president. We tried to understand how people looked after their families. The person that we saw was a woman, so I think there was a lot of things that we didn't hear that but the whole concept was something that was very awe-inspiring. And I just wanted to pick up on Caroline's question as well about, it was an eye-watering amount of money. You've gone from, you putting in 16,000 euros, and I think it was a bit 11,600 if you went to the retail co-op, but you could buy your place, I think it was with 20% to start off with. So it was something that you added to. Presumably there was a timescale to get that funding back in, and it wasn't supposed to be. It wasn't supposed to stop people becoming a member, but the whole point of it was how the organisation thrived. It was that capital that came from the members. If you compare that to your local co-op where you put £1 in to get your share of the divvy, a very different way of doing it.
Yeah, just one point to pick up on there. I think it was I think they talked about a 2-year sort of salary sacrifice process to pay that back. So it was sort of something that could be paid back over time, or paid over time, but ultimately the expectation is that you pay the full amount. But yeah, that does give you a very direct stake, and as much stake as any other individual within the firm. So unlike a typical shareholder organization where whoever has the most shares has the most influence, it's very much not that. But yeah.
Thanks, Simon. And just one last point. I think there's definitely a lot of learning to share with the GM policy lab, which is happening at the moment around developing the Greater Manchester cooperative economy. So if you're happy for me to make an introduction, just to maybe share that presentation with the people who are doing that piece of work, that would be great. One of the things that we have been looking at in Oldham, that I sort of, as we've been talking, I was just reflecting on, is looking at how we improve the foundational economy in Oldham. So we've got obviously really a low wage economy. and there's some money that's Greater Manchester have made available to do like a pilot around improving the foundational economy. It's called the Foundational Economy Innovation Fund, and they're providing grants for various projects which look to develop new ideas and new ways of thinking about the foundational economy. And I'm thinking that the cooperative model could be one of those ideas that we could maybe put forward on the back of the policy lab. I think at the moment it is just for GM, but it might be something that other members of the group want to have a little look at and think about. Nicola, did you want to come back in?
Just to say, if you're interested in this, anybody, please come along to the annual conference on the 23rd and 24th of November. We'll be feeding back in the first plenary, which is on cooperative economies in action, and we've got the leader of South Ribble going through what the lessons were from that, as well as some other fabulous speakers. And then one of the breakouts is around Mondragon next steps for the UK. So not just those people that went on the visit, but if you've been inspired by the stuff that Simon's been talking about today, please come along. And conference is free. You get 3 free places. I'll probably say that again before we finish. But it is an opportunity to meet everybody in person, but to also have these conversations, and maybe it's the start of other conversations as well. So, while it's fresh in your mind, look.
Thanks, Nicola. Thanks, Simon. We'll move on to our next agenda item, which is some introductions from some of our new members. First, we've got Ian from Inverclyde Council. Ian, I'll hand over to you.
Yep, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ian Strachan. I'm Head of Legal and Democratic Services at Inverclyde Council. So I'm coming to you from, I was going to say sunny Scotland, but it's wet and cold outside. I don't know, I haven't prepared a presentation or anything. I don't know, what do you want? Just a couple of minutes?
Yeah,
Jonathan.
A couple of minutes would be perfect, Ian. Yeah, just maybe a bit about where your council's at on its co-op journey, and maybe what you hope to get out of being a member of the network would be great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Inverclyde, there's 32 local authorities in Scotland. So we're sort of, in terms of area, we're one of the smallest, 29th out of the 32 and 28th, I think, out of the 32 in terms of population. And probably our big challenge, as you may or may not be aware, but it's the Back Clyde. Inverclyde, it's the mouth of the Clyde. So traditionally shipbuilding, heavy industry, but of course, like a number of members, we have big challenges now around the absence of that industry, around regeneration, jobs. We have a reducing population, which is a particular issue for us and some adjoining authorities. High levels of deprivation, drugs, poor health. We were hit particularly badly, unfortunately, at the outset of the pandemic, related to that as well. So that was sort of by way of background. 22 elected members. We are currently, we had local government elections earlier this year. We have 22 elected members. Our minority Labour administration, which we've been for approximately 15 years, but with an SNP, MSP, MP. Obviously, Scotland has a different political dynamic, what might be said to be a febrile political atmosphere, but it is everywhere, isn't it? But a lot of the challenges are the same. I mean, in terms of our sort of overall vision, is about getting it right for every child, citizen, and community. Because of our size, we are very much community-based. Interestingly, we did in the February budget, but for the past few years, we haven't needed to go to a vote on the budget. It's been dealt with by, close member cooperation and working together. So some of the politics that you see in other authorities doesn't impact in the same way, but that's getting more challenging. But they are very much community focused. We have a couple of our Labour councillors are sort of Labour and cooperative members, which we're seeing a bit more of across the country. So actually the timing of this, and one of those is going to the conference, is quite timely. In terms of staff, we have about 4,500. We've got about 77 odd thousand citizens. So we are small, but it's those sorts of challenges that I mentioned earlier that we're particularly concerned about. We had some work done from Fraser Allender Institute and looked at how some authorities down south had sort of dealt with some of the issues we have around depopulation, urban regeneration. We've got a levelling up bid in. So I suppose from our perspective, be interested to connect with other members in terms of some of the particular challenges and I suppose solutions they've sought around some of those same issues. In terms of the budget gap, we're projecting sort of 50, well, our revenue budget's around sort of 220 million odd. We're projecting a gap currently of around 15.2 million for the next 2 financial years. So small compared to others, I know, but for us, they've never had to deal with budget cuts like that. So particularly challenging for them at the moment, like it is everywhere. And again, sort of the wider things we're looking at in terms of net zero, community engagement, all these sorts of things. So a lot of the same challenges, different regulatory framework. But as I say, I think for us, it's being part of a group where we think that other members are aligned with our thinking and about trying to do the right thing for the authority, putting the politics to one side where we can, and just using it as an opportunity, because we've got similar networks in Scotland, but using it as an opportunity to see what others are doing, other things there that we could learn from, copy shamelessly, and share our experiences where we can as well, where that's of benefit. So looking forward to getting to know people. But that's that. Happy to take any questions, but that Inverclyde in a snapshot.
Oh, that's brilliant, Ian. Really appreciate that, and it's great to have another Scottish council in membership. Is it our 3rd full council in membership, Nicola? Yes, fantastic. We've already got, is it Edinburgh and Glasgow, long time members, so it's great to welcome Inverclyde. Does anyone have any questions for Ian? I'm sure many of the challenges that Ian's outlined will be very familiar to a lot of our members. Nicola, do you want to come in?
I was just, it's Jonathan Nunn's not on here, and he's my sort of go-to numbers person. But the deprivation indices, I know he mentioned he's mentioned before about the correlation between the councils with the highest rates of deprivation, how very many of them are also members of the CCIN. I don't have the facts there, but it could be that's worth digging that out and maybe introducing. I could introduce Ian to Jonathan, give him a bit of a backstory, just to, and then in a way it sort of like helps you know when you send your councillor to Telford, he's got a bit of a hit list of people that he might want to just introduce himself to as well.
That'd be great, thank you.
No problem.
And we also have on the call, of course, Katerina from Newham. Again, Katerina, it'd be great if you could just say hello and just a bit about your local authority. I know Nicola's messaged me to say that you're actually going to do more of a presentation next officer meeting actually about Newham, but just to say hello and just maybe say a few words.
Yeah, hello, my colleague Noel Hatch, head of scrutiny policy and partnerships at Newham. I'm a senior policy design officer at Newham. Yeah, we just recently joined. Our mayor is very much committed to building a more cooperative borough, community wealth building. We published a community wealth building strategy 2020, I think, a couple of years ago, basically, and have a lot of other things going on. Newham is one of the most deprived boroughs in London. Almost 50% of people live in poverty after paying rent, but at the same time, it's kind of on that border of being in or out of London borough. So it's kind of a lot of the support that we could get, we're not getting, but we counted it as an out of London borough, and kind of I guess with the current government, also kind of left to fend for ourselves in many ways, as so many of you as well. So yeah, just very keen on both from the officer side and from the kind of councillor side to join and to learn more and yeah, create a better community for all of us.
Thanks, Katerina. And yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the sort of the not inclusive economy, but it wasn't like community wealth building strategy, wasn't it? Because I remember reading that when we were developing our community wealth building approach and sort of stealing from it. So there you go, another example of begging, borrowing and stealing happening across the network. So yeah.
Oh yeah, I previously worked at Waltham Forest, and I was just saying, it's like, have a look at what Newham's doing. So when I started here, I felt, you know, yeah, still very excited about working here. So it's an exciting borough, but with immense challenges.
Absolutely. Oh, well, welcome to the network. Does anyone have any questions for Katerina? Nope, no problem. We will move swiftly on. Nicola, I think it's over to you for an update on the policy lab and policy prototype processes for the next financial year.
Right, I'm going to share my screen. This is a screen, should be lots of pink, you should be able to see. Yeah, brilliant. So we've got our AGM on the 23rd of November, and we'll be announcing at the AGM the next funding round for 2023 Policy Labs. 24th of November, second day of the conference. So we'll be announcing that at the AGM. I know it doesn't seem 5 minutes, and it probably isn't since the last funding round, because we approved a range of projects to fund in June, but that was because we had last year's AGM this year, and therefore we've had 2 lots of funding for this year, which is good because it means that some of these projects are still at the front of your mind. So just as a recap, really, last year we went through a process and it will be exactly the same this time. I'll tell you when it's all ready for you. Well, it'll be all ready for you to put your bids in once they're announced on the 24th. But we'll have space on the website on this page for you to upload your ideas. You can see this one here that says upload your details to the spreadsheet. And then there'll be a period of time for you to talk to each other and to put your bids together. Jonathan and I haven't had that discussion yet of when the deadline's going to be, but if we launch on the 24th of January, it's probably going to be near the end of, 24th of November, it's probably going to be near the end of January, when we're going to ask you to submit your policy lab applications. And then those applications will go forward to an exec oversight committee, probably in February, for them to determine whether they go through and we agree to fund them. There's how we did it last year, and the reason that I wanted to have a discussion, if I keep scrolling down, you'll see that this group last year came up with loads of ideas, some of which didn't make it to expressions of interest. And I think part of that was because the period where we went out to members was quite long, but it also included the local elections. And I don't sit in your chairs, but I imagine it's really tough trying to get politicians to make decisions on whether to put a bid in for some funding at the same time when they're fighting for their places in on the council. So some of these were brilliant ideas and may still be appropriate, so I'd quite like some indication on that. I'm not going to read them all out, but the further I go to the bottom, we get to the ones that actually went through. So the visit to Mondragon was approved, the Arts and Culture for Social Cohesion was approved. There was one that came in from Rochdale, which came alongside this, so didn't go through. Oh, actually, I think it might be. Oh, it's this one, but they called it something else. Engaging communities and local democracy. It's now called democratising local policy, I think. It's the title that we approved. Simon and Oxford, you had one in that has became funded as a policy prototype. So, and the board decided that you should put in a bid for next time. So there's that opportunity as well to get your partners together. So we'll go through the same process. We'll give you as much time as we possibly can, but it's never too early to start thinking about what these projects might be. Jonathan's mentioned that I think we've got 5 or 6 members in GM now of GM councils. Trafford signed up, and I'm hoping to announce another one shortly in the area. We've now got 5 or 6 London boroughs, so again it lends itself to doing something geographically in London that we've not funded before, so some common issues that members there might want to see for having some funding put into. We've also you may know there's a session at the annual conference on the work that's being match funded by Power to Change as well, so that's another one, which is called building a cooperative development toolkit for councils. That's a massive piece of work. We've never had such a big project that we've got with that one. So that's 20k from Power to Change plus the CCIM's 20k. So it really is down to you if you've got partners that you want to work with, if you've got you want to have conversations at the annual conference. We'll be launching it proper to the rest of the conference on the 24th at the AGM in the morning, and then we'll be open up the door. So we might, Jonathan, we might put it on the agenda again for the December call, just to see just to add that brain thinking time before Christmas. Let's get some ideas together and then commit them onto the website so that you can think about how you put that expression of interest in. Does anybody have any questions on that? Easy questions on that. Good. That's good. I've obviously got a button that's just muted everybody. It's always good to have the power and the control.
Just to say one thing that I will say, because Jonathan Nunn would say it if he was here, it's a really good idea to start having those conversations as early as possible, especially with anyone that you're planning on working with. I think it's really easy to underestimate how long it takes to work up a policy lab proposal. So if you're interested in doing something, we'd recommend having those conversations sooner rather than later. Well, I can see Caroline's got a hand up.
Yes. Yeah, hi. I work with Jonathan Nunn. Obviously he's not here today, but he did ask if there was a couple of things that I could mention about policy labs, if that's okay. I think Nicola has already mentioned this to you, perhaps in an email, just some things that he hadn't thought about when he was going through the process. Is that okay? Of
course it is.
Yeah. So he'd said that the few things that were required for the policy lab when he went through the process, which were joint or separate forwards from the cabinet lead for CCIN of the full member council leading on the policy lab, a short text about the policy lab for the newsletter with a photo, content for a conference workshop unpacking the outcomes of the project, and speech for a conference launch of the policy lab. So I haven't been really involved in this, so it's like a collection of words that don't quite mean a lot to me, I have to say, but hopefully that does make sense. Well, I'm sure it will make sense to Jonathan.
So yeah, thank you for that. And Jonathan Nunn is always very insightful in because the way his mind works in terms of the processing of how the applications work. So what we've done this time, or what we will do for the next lot of bids that we fund, and in the feedback for the ones that we've just funded, is we're going to include what you've just said, so that it's very clear when we give the funding what the expectations are. So it's more about the expectations of what you need to be able to do, because that's it's like a tick box really. So thinking about whether Oxford have just been through this, do we have an introduction or a forward from their council leader, or is it joint with the chair of the CCIN? And you know, it's that sort of thing. It not being a surprise when you're asked to present it at the annual conference, because we're talking of giving up to £20,000 worth of funding. We don't want people to think that, oh well, you know, I've done the report now, I haven't got to tell anybody about it. So it's that sort of, and having a report that's in publishable quality at the end. This year we doubled the budget. And we've been able to get some fabulous design work done on the reports that we've published the last couple of years using the resources from Co-op News. It doesn't cost a lot, but it does mean that what our final outcomes are, it's all part and parcel of bidding for that piece of work, so that basically I don't get a Word document at the end and then I have to turn it into something magical. It's all done as part of the bidding process and the approval process. So yeah, thank you for that, Caroline. And it's definitely, you can tell him, it's definitely on my list to make sure it's included in the feedback for this year.
Thanks, Nicola. Yeah, it's still you know, it's still a learning process for us too in terms of the policy labs and policy prototypes. So we have been doing them for many years. We tend to get a bit smarter every year in terms of what we ask for. So any feedback is always welcome. We do try, just as to caveat all that, to make it as simple and straightforward as possible, recognising how busy everyone is. But it is really important that we do shout about the work, because we want to make sure that, you know, your council leaders especially know what value they're getting from their membership of the network, and there's some really fantastic stuff happening. And it is important that we share that best practice far and wide. So yeah, building in a lot more support around getting that message out once those pieces of work is completed is definitely a really important part of this. Any more questions for Nicola on the Policy Labs prototypes? No. Just to say before we finish, before I come to any other business, we are still struggling for sort of topics for future officer network meetings. We do have a couple of volunteers who have suggested a few really good topics, but especially for sort of next year, ideally we want to get a really good forward plan in place. So if anyone has anything that they'd like to cover, or any topics that they'd like to suggest covered, just get in touch with myself or Mahmouda, and we'll pop them on the list. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a topic that you want to speak about, but if there's something that you're interested about more broadly, we will try and find speakers on particular themes or issues that are relevant to the network. So don't hesitate to let us know. So any other business, anything that anyone wants to make us aware of? Oh, Nicola, your hand went straight up. Go on.
Oh, well, I can't let the meeting disappear without finish without saying that our chair, Councillor Sharon Taylor, yesterday became Baroness Taylor of Stevenage. She had her an event in the House of Lords, which I managed to see a recording of this morning. I'm going to see if I can how to share that on the CCIM Facebook page. I failed completely on the tech side. I only managed to work out how to share it to my own Facebook page, which wasn't my intention. So I will save it to the CCIM one. We're obviously thrilled that Sharon's moved on to the House of Lords, and it's coincided with I've popped her statement into the chat, and it will be, it's the lead on our November newsletter. So as soon as you approve that, I'll be sending that out. Coinciding with that, we have elections this year for all of our positions on the Exec Oversight Committee and our Values and Principles Board. You should have had a mailing. If you didn't have a mailing last Thursday maybe, please let me know. My email is it's comms@councils.coop. It means you're not on the distributions list, or you've put me into your spam folder. Either way, check it out. We've got elections. I've put the link to the one on the newsletter from the website. We're going to do Exec Oversight Committee first. We'll be announcing, so we've gone out to members. The deadline for that is noon on the 25th of November. Once we've completed the elections for Exec Oversight Committee, including electing our new chair for the network, we'll go out and fill the places on the Values and Principles Board. So all councils have the opportunity to sit on the governance. We'll do EOC first, and then anybody that doesn't get onto EOC that would like to stand for VMP, they can do that. So it's each council can only stand for or have a seat on one part of the governance. Paul, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, it's just to clarify, Nicola, for the EOC, that has to be a leader or a cabinet member, is that right?
It does.
Yeah, just wanted to clarify that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks.
It's all right. We're a little bit more flexible on values and principles.
Yeah.
But we, the network should be led by a council leader. And at the moment, that's what our new constitution says. So that's what we approved at the February meeting.
Yeah. Thanks.
Any other questions for Nicola or any other business? No, in that case, I will let you all go and see you in a month's time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.